The wind carried the familiar London chill, a crisp edge to the air that bit at the cheeks of the thousands gathered along the Mall. It was June 2018, and the city was awash with a festive spirit for the annual Trooping the Colour, the official public celebration of the Queen's birthday. From the balcony of Buckingham Palace, the royal family presented a tableau of tradition and continuity. There was the Queen, a figure of stoic grace in her primrose yellow, and beside her, the younger generation, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, with their 3 children. Little Prince Louis, just a few months old, was safely in his mother's arms, while 4-year-old Prince George stood attentively by his father. But it was the 3-year-old Princess Charlotte who held a particular fascination for the crowd below and for the millions watching on television. She was a miniature of her mother, a spirited child with a confident wave and a personality that seemed too big for her small frame. To help her see the spectacular fly past, a thunderous roar of helicopters and the iconic red arrows trailing red, white, and blue smoke, Charlotte stood on a small, discreet wooden box placed just behind the balcony's stone balustrade. It was a common practice for the youngest royals, a simple solution to give them a view of the spectacle. As the first aircraft roared overhead, a deafening noise that vibrated through the very stones of the palace, Charlotte's head tilted all the way back, her wide blue eyes fixed on the sky. On the palace forecourt and down the Mall, the roar of the engines was intoxicating, a physical presence that seemed to pull her upwards. Mesmerized, she leaned further, her small body tilting towards the low historic railing. On the palace forecourt and down the Mall, the crowd cheered and waved flags. But on the balcony, a silent, high-stakes drama was unfolding in a split second. Among the assembled royals, standing with the rigid posture expected of a guardsman on duty, was a member of the Royal Protection Command. He was a fixture in the background of countless royal photographs, an unremarkable figure in a perfectly tailored suit, his earpiece a subtle sign of his purpose. His eyes, however, were never still. They constantly swept the crowd, the rooftops, and, most importantly, the immediate vicinity of his principals. And he was trained to assess threat in a fraction of a second. A raised hand, a strange package, an unsteady gait. Today, his focus was zeroed in on the youngest members of the family. He saw Charlotte's wobble before anyone else did. He saw the way her center of gravity shifted too far forward as she chased the path of a disappearing jet. Her little feet shuffled on the box, searching for balance that wasn't there. There was no time to shout a warning, no time to alert the Duchess. The officer's body reacted before his conscious mind could form a complete thought. In one fluid motion that went almost entirely unnoticed by the cameras, he took a silent, powerful step forward. His arm extended, not grabbing or snatching, but placing a firm, steadying hand on Charlotte's back. It was the lightest of touches, and a wall of support that halted her forward momentum instantly. At that exact moment, Kate Middleton, who had been watching the sky while holding Louis, glanced down. She saw the officer's hand on her daughter, saw Charlotte's startled expression as she was gently guided back to a stable stance. A flicker of understanding and profound relief crossed the Duchess's face. She leaned down, her lips moving in a soft, reassuring whisper to her daughter, who now leaned back against the solid warmth of her mother's legs. The officer had already melted back into the background, his face an impassive mask once more. The flypast continued, the crowd roared, and the moment was gone. For the world, it was just another royal appearance. For one man, it was the successful completion of his most critical duty, the silent intervention that had prevented a potential tragedy on the world's most famous balcony. The man who had moved so swiftly was named Sergeant James Blake, a pseudonym used to protect his identity, as is standard for those in royal protection. He was a veteran of the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit, an elite group of officers for whom discretion and anonymity were not just professional requirements, but a way of life. James was not the type of officer who sought the limelight. In fact, his success depended on being utterly invisible. He was a master of what his colleagues called the gray man technique, being present but unremarkable, a piece of furniture that happened to have eyes in the back of its head. His path to the balcony of Buckingham Palace had been anything but ordinary. Before joining the Royal Protection Unit, James had spent a decade in the Territorial Support Group, the Met's Public Order Unit, dealing with everything from violent protests to street-level crime. He had the calm, measured demeanor of a man who had seen the worst of humanity but had chosen not to let it harden him. After that, he was selected for the Elite Specialist Protection Command, where he learned the intricate dance of close protection, the formation drills, the counter-surveillance techniques, the art of the protective stare, designed to deter a potential attacker. He had protected prime ministers, foreign dignitaries, and visiting heads of state, but protecting the Cambridge children was different. It was more personal. The threat wasn't just a determined terrorist. It was also a simple accident, and a moment of childish curiosity. On the evening of Trooping the Color, after the family had retreated into the staterooms of the palace, James filed his routine report. In the sterile, emotionless language of police work, he noted the incident. Principal, Princess Charlotte, lost balance during flypast. Stabilized principal. No injury, no further action. It was a single line, an understated summary of a moment that could have changed history. He didn't mention the cold jolt of adrenaline that had shot through him, the way his heart hammered against his ribs for a full minute afterward, or the quiet sense of satisfaction he felt when he saw the Duchess give him a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks as the family left the balcony. That nod was his only recognition. Later that night, he called his wife, and as he always did when on a long shift. "All quiet?" she asked. The same question she'd asked 100 times before. "All quiet," he replied, his voice weary but calm. He didn't tell her about the 3-year-old girl, the low railing, and the fraction of a second that had separated a normal day from a national catastrophe. He wouldn't. It wasn't about secrecy for secrecy's sake, it was about respect. The moments he witnessed, the vulnerabilities he saw, were not his to share. They were a sacred trust. He carried the image of Charlotte's trusting, startled face with him, a silent reminder of why he did what he did. Months turned into years, and the rhythm of life at Anmer Hall in Norfolk and Kensington Palace in London continued. Sergeant James Blake became a familiar, reassuring presence to the Cambridge children. To them, he was simply James, the man who was always there, who opened doors, who stood quietly in the corner during their mother's engagements, and who sometimes, on a good day, would share a knowing smile when Prince Louis was being particularly mischievous. He was as much a part of their landscape as the nanny Maria or their beloved dog Lupo. The children didn't question why James was always around. It was simply a fact of their lives. He watched them grow. He saw Prince George's serious, thoughtful nature develop as he started school. He witnessed Princess Charlotte's transformation from a toddler with a wobble into a confident, determined little girl with a strong will and a protective instinct for her younger brother. He was there on the first day of school at Thomas's Battersea, his presence a subtle shield against the paparazzi lenses that lined the streets. He was there during family skiing trips in the French Alps, his skis always pointed downhill, ready to react in an instant if one of the children lost control on the icy slopes. He learned their routines, their moods, their fears. He knew that Charlotte was afraid of loud, sudden noises, a piece of information he filed away in his mental databank. He knew that George could be shy in new situations. And that Louis, well, Louis was a force of nature who required constant, gentle corralling. The bond was subtle, but real. One afternoon at a public engagement, a large, enthusiastic crowd surged against the barriers. The family was walking along a rope line, accepting flowers and greeting well-wishers. James was in his element, on his body angled to create a buffer between the crowd and the children. He saw a man's arm thrust forward, not aggressively but with unexpected speed, reaching for Charlotte to offer a gift. Before the man could even get close, James had smoothly interposed himself, his hand gently but firmly guiding the man's arm back behind the barrier. "Mind the barrier, sir," he said, his voice polite but with an unmistakable edge of steel. Charlotte, who had flinched for a second, looked up at James. He gave her a tiny, reassuring wink. Her small face relaxed, and she continued walking, holding her mother's hand, secure in the knowledge that James was there. He wasn't just a guard, he was a guardian, a silent, steadfast protector woven into the fabric of their childhood. A decade later, Princess Charlotte, now a poised and confident 10-year-old, she stood on the exact same spot on the Buckingham Palace balcony. The occasion was different, a celebration marking a major royal milestone, but the scene was achingly familiar. The crowds cheered below, the roar of the flypast once again filled the sky, and the family was arrayed in a familiar tableau. Charlotte no longer needed a box to see over the balustrade. She stood tall, her hand resting lightly on the shoulder of her youngest brother, Louis, who was now standing on the very same wooden box she had used years before. Across the balcony, his hair now flecked with gray, stood James Blake. He was still there, still in the background, his eyes still constantly moving. He watched as Louis, mesmerized by a low-flying helicopter, leaned forward just a little too far. He saw Charlotte's reaction before his own muscles could even tense. Without missing a beat, Charlotte's hand tightened on Louis's shoulder, and she gently pulled him back, steadying him against her side. She leaned down and said something in his ear, something that made him giggle and look at the sky with more caution. James felt a wave of emotion, so profound it surprised him. He remembered another child, another wobble, another moment of peril on this very spot. He saw the protective gesture Charlotte had just made, a perfect mirror of the one he had made for her. The values had been passed on. The protection she had received as a vulnerable toddler had become a part of her own character. She was now a protector herself. He stood a little straighter, a quiet, proud smile touching his lips. The world saw a princess. James saw the little girl he had once steadied, now standing firm and strong, a testament to the quiet, unseen work of those who dedicate their lives to the safety of others. His work was done. He had helped keep her safe, not just from physical danger, but from the fear that such danger creates, allowing her to grow into the confident young woman she was today. He was just a shadow in the background, but in that moment, he knew his purpose had been fulfilled.